Hey friends, Peter Faciano here. Welcome back to my series on the comparison of the Canon M6 Mark II and the Canon R6. Now in these videos, I'm trying to attempt to give you a fair comparison between the two cameras. Now I know one's a crop sensor and the other one's a full frame sensor, so in essence we're doing apples and orange comparison here. But just kind of stick with me. Since I had these two cameras, I kind of wanted to see how they held up against one another. In today's video, I'm going to go ahead and present to you guys a couple of photos. I'm looking at ISO performance, stabilization, cropping into the sensors to see if there's a quality difference, and kind of just an overall performance and how these things actually take photos. So let's go ahead and jump into today's video. All right, so the first thing that I need to get out of the way is full frame equivalent and the lenses or the setup that I'm using. So the M6 Mark II is a crop sensor camera, and I'm shooting with the 55 to 250 millimeter lens. The full frame equivalent of this lens is a 400 millimeter. So on the R6, I have the 400 millimeter. So all of these photos that you guys are going to be seeing are going to be taken with these two lenses. So you kind of have an equivalent, whatever the equivalency can be. I'm trying to keep them at the same aperture, the same ISO, but wildlife, and I'm using this in the context of how I use the cameras. Wildlife's not cooperative, so I'm going to be shooting over the course of multiple weeks. And as I get usable footage, I'll go ahead and throw a video up and just kind of talk about the things that I've done with the cameras. And again, in today's video, I'm going to go ahead and talk about ISO performance, the animal eye detect versus just the lock-on tracking, the stability within the lens or within the body, and cropping in on the sensor. Now, I have a local estuary park area that has some birds, and over the past couple of days, a bald eagle or a pair of eagles have been showing up to this place. So you're going to see a lot of pictures of bald eagles, some hummingbirds, and I believe a song sparrow. So let's go ahead and start, first of all, taking a look at the cropping of this camera, or of these cameras or the sensors, and see if there's a quality difference when you do crop in, extreme crop ins. And the eagles that you guys are seeing here on this picture are 100 yards away. And I know that distance within a wildlife situation, you want to get as close as you possibly can to the wildlife. And in my situation, I just couldn't get any closer. So I just felt this would be a fair comparison. If you're just an amateur and you're trying to figure out what these cameras can do, I think this is a pretty good representation of maybe not necessarily the extremes, but maybe a situation that you might find yourself in. And let's see how these things look. All right, let's go ahead and jump on the computer and let's talk about these three pictures. So first off, we have the M6 Mark II. This is at 100 yards, not the best nature photograph in the world, but this kind of just shows you what the camera can do. We're going to be looking at the sensor. M6 Mark II has the 32.5 megapixels. So basically, the strength of this is the croppability. So you would be able to crop in and still retain some detail, which is showing on this next picture. Now, again, I don't know the technical aspects of figuring out how many megapixels you're working with when you're cropping in, but just looking at this picture, this is the raw file. I used 250 millimeter lens, f5.6. I'm at 1/1000th of a second, and the ISO is at 250. And if you take a look at the raw file, the eagle looks pretty clean, and you're getting some grain at 250 ISO. Now I threw a horrible LUT on here just to show you what a lookup table might look like when you put this on here. If anybody's interested in the LUT that I got, I downloaded Jared Poland's FroPack 1 and FroPack 2, and this is Skittles. Now, when we take a look at the R6 photo of the same eagle, I tried to keep everything as equal as I could. I just put down the M6 Mark II, and then I picked up the Canon R6 and shot the same photograph. Now the eagle turned a little bit, but we're still working at 400 millimeters as opposed to the full frame equivalent of the 240 or the 250 millimeter. So we basically have the same view. I'm at 5.6, 1/1000th of a second, and the ISO is a little bit lower at 200 on this one. And if we crop in on the 20 megapixel sensor, you're seeing that there isn't as much grain. So I think the R6 handles the ISOs a little bit better, but you start to lose quality, and the eagle's not as crisp. So I think that's where the M6 Mark II's 32.5 megapixel kind of shines a little bit better than the R6. I had 20 shots of the eagle on the M6 Mark II and the R6, And when I took a look at all of the pictures, every single one of them looked like this as far as clarity. And I don't think this is an out of focus image. I don't think it's a focusing issue. I just think that this might be showcasing the megapixels and how a higher megapixel can do good when you're trying to crop in on a photo. But on the flip side, you also have sacrifices with introducing noise or grain into your picture as well. And again, I added the same LUT to the picture, and it's not the best wildlife photo in the world by any stretch of the imagination. But again, I'm an amateur and I'm just showing what the cameras can do if you need to push them into a certain crop to see the actual image itself. Now, when we take a look at them side by side, this is where you can actually start to see the difference between the grains in each picture and the clarity or the crisp or the sharpness of them. So in the M6, if you look at the background, you absolutely do see grain. In the R6, there is a little bit, but not much. But then if you look at the clarity of the picture or maintaining detail, the M6 definitely looks a little bit better than the R6. Are both of them usable? Absolutely. If you absolutely need to use these pictures, then you can use them. And again, I need to reiterate this again. I am looking at this as far as a nature photographer, a hobbyist. These pictures are not the best wildlife pictures in the world, and I'm piecing together over weeks at a time because wildlife is not cooperative. So as I'm taking photos and videos, I'll come back and I'll update these videos, these versus videos. So what you should probably get out of this video today is the stabilization, the ISO settings, the low light performance, or introducing the grain, how they actually perform with ISO settings. And then we're also looking at stabilization. I can just get stabilization out of the way right now. Stabilization, either lens stabilization in the M6 Mark II or the in-body image stabilization within the R6. They both work great. So I don't think there's really that much of a comparison. If you have an image stabilized lens in the M6 Mark II, you're gonna do great. You'll be able to hand hold, and these pictures are handheld. You're gonna be able to hand hold to pretty low shutter speeds without getting blurriness. So I think they're comparable, but I don't have many tests to prove how comparable they are. You just basically have to get a camera in hand or a lens in hand and use them to see how the stabilization works. But they're great. Stabilized lenses and in-body image stabilization in a camera, they're fantastic. So I'm not going to touch much on those aspects of it. Just understand that the image stabilization in the lens and the body image stabilization, they're both very good. And you guys tell me, in the comments below, I mean, would you be able to use both of these pictures? And these are the raw files. Again, yeah, I think you can. So next up is the low light scenario and the animal eye detect or the lock-on tracking. So in this picture, we have a song sparrow. I specifically chose this picture because it demonstrates the ability of the animal eye detect. When I first started, I have back button focus set up on the camera. The focus points were jumping around slightly, and then it immediately caught the bird's eye and it locked onto the bird's eye. I'm at a high ISO, 8000, and you'll see here in a second how well the R6 handles high ISOs. Everything else is the same, 5.6, 1/4000th of a second. This is handheld, this is the raw file. Now, when we take a look at the cropped in image, the eye of the song sparrow, really, really crisp, and the animal eye detect worked great here. It took maybe one tap of the back button focus. It jumped around into the front portion of the weeds or the stick, and then it immediately locked on to the bird. Now, was it flawless? No. It took one button push, and there's a couple of other times where I had to push it once or 2 or 3 times, and then it locked down. But taking a look at the grain or the noise at 8000, I mean, I think this is spectacular. And I did some post processing. I didn't put a LUT on it. I just color graded it myself. Now, moving on to the same type of picture, but this time I used the M6 Mark II. ISOs are a little bit lower. This is still handheld, and since the M6 Mark II doesn't have animal eye detect, I relied on the lock-on tracking. So it took multiple times to try to get this bird into focus. The little blue dots, the little blue squares, jumped around a whole lot. It was jumping to the twigs, to the branches, to the bird's body, to the bird's head, to the tail. Up in the top right corner, it would catch the leaf, and then eventually it would settle on the bird's body. And when we zoom in on this, you're going to see that the ISO performance doesn't hold up to the R6 at all. There's a ton of noise and grain in here. And as you can tell, the stick that's kind of going across the bird's eye, the camera really struggled with picking up the bird itself with the lock-on tracking. So the R6 by far outperformed in this area. Not to say that the M6 Mark II didn't do an okay job, but it definitely didn't do as well as the R6. And then the last photo I want to show you guys today is when all things are being equal, what can the cameras do? So if you have good light, if you're working at low ISOs, if you have a subject that's pretty close, what does the image look like? And for that, we have Hummingbird. You know, I'm kind of partial to these Hummingbirds, but so with this Hummingbird, I'm using the R6 ISO 200. I'm at 1/640th of a second, so I should get some motion blur with the wings. Handheld, this is the raw file. I cropped in, and again, I need to repeat myself. I don't know the technical terms of this and how many megapixels I'm actually utilizing when I crop in. Or I'm sure there's a formula out there that tells you how many megapixels you're using when you crop in. But this is the cropped photo. It's processed. I think it's extremely clean and crisp. Good light makes for good photos. So again, ISO 200, take a look at the background behind the Hummingbird. Looks pretty clean. You know, the grain that is there or the noise that is there, I believe is, you know, to me, it's kind of a pleasing look as opposed to, you know, the other larger grain sizes that show up in the M6 Mark II. Okay, moving on to the M6 Mark II. Again, same Hummingbird. It was just in a closer bush in front of me. So with this one, I'm at ISO 320, 1/640th of a second, handheld. This is the raw, you guys can read that. And when I cropped in on this one, I think this was probably my favorite image of the day. I just like the colors. I like the position of the Hummingbird. If you look at the grain in the background or the noise, I don't know what you guys call it, grain or noise, whatever the case is. If you take a look at that, even at 250, you can still see it, but it's not a distraction. So when all things are being equal with these cameras, I think you can get really good images out of both of them. It's just a matter of ISO performance. And I think that's going to be, from today's video, I think that's the biggest issue or the biggest aspect that I wanted to bring across. The ISO performance in the R6 is, I think, far superior to the M6 Mark II. Even when you're looking at this other image, I mean, the Song Sparrow was at 8,000, ISO 8,000, and the grain is almost negligible. I mean, it's there, but if we take a look at that same kind of situation at the Song Sparrow with the M6 Mark II, we're looking at 6,400 ISO. So a much lower ISO rating, but the grain has almost doubled. So, I mean, you guys can see these pictures. You can make judgment for yourself. Which one do you think performed better in ISO ratings? I think the R6 did a much better job, as the dog next door starts to bark. So I think the R6 did a much better job with the ISOs than the M6 Mark II. Hand holding both cameras with the image stabilization in the lens or the in-body image stabilization on the camera, it's a wash. I think they both perform very, very well. With the cropping, when you crop in on the sensor, I think the 32.5 megapixels on the M6 Mark II leaves you a cleaner looking image. As far as the R6 goes, I think it looks a little bit soft and you don't hold as much detail. So I think that's where I'm going to leave it today. And again, I'm going to repeat myself once again over the course of the next couple of weeks, because wildlife doesn't necessarily cooperate. As soon as I get usable footage, I'll put video comparisons in here along with some other photo comparisons. And hopefully by the time we get done with this entire video series comparing these two cameras, you'll have a better informed decision to make and whether or not to upgrade, to purchase one of these cameras, or to maybe even think about getting the RP or the EOS R. I mean, they're both relatively in the same price range as the M6 Mark II, and the RP and the R are full frame cameras. So you guys have a lot of decisions to make. It's not up to me to tell you what you guys should buy. I try to kind of keep my opinions out of these videos. Obviously, I can't keep my opinions out completely, but I don't know your workflow. I don't know your budget and your needs or your wants. I'm a sucker for a wanting. That's why I end up getting the R6, the R5, along with the M6 Mark II. So do I need these cameras? No. Did I want them? Yes. And that's a mental hurdle that I need to get over. But I hope you guys stick around for the next couple of videos. The series will probably end up trying to be every Sunday. But again, nature is a fickle thing. If I can get usable footage, I'll throw a video up. If not, I might have to skip a week. And I think I will have one ready next Sunday dealing with the 120 frames per second. The Eagles were very cooperative, and I shot the Eagles with the M6 Mark II and the R6 at 120 frames per second, slow motion, and there's an overheating issue, and I think you guys might be surprised on the results. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it there this week. If you guys enjoyed this, go ahead and give me a like. If you're not a subscriber and you like this kind of content, go ahead and consider subscribing. Just kind of click on that little subscribe button right there. Share it with somebody. Leave some comments down below and let me know what you guys think of these comparison pictures or these comparison videos. And if you have any other suggestions on what you guys want to see between these two cameras, let me know. And I guess with all that being said, I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.